Hello YouTube, I'm Rosie. I'm a New Zealander living in France, which is definitely a story for another time. And today I wanted to tackle one of the biggest stereotypes about the French people and one of the most Googled things about the French people of all time, which is, why are the French so rude? So in this video, I'll be exploring where I think the stereotype came from, some potential cultural explanations for this phenomenon, and some simple tips so that if you're in France, you can avoid situations in which the French unleash the rudeness on you. Also guys, I'm just starting out on YouTube, so if you like what you see, please give this video a thumbs up or hit subscribe to show me some love. So where is this stereotype coming from? Well, I have to say I think a large part is coming from tourists visiting Paris in particular and interacting with people in service-based roles. Travel websites like Skyscanner have ranked France as the #1 rudest destination, and TripAdvisor forums are overflowing with complaints about French rudeness and the lack of customer service. I do tend to believe that when there's smoke, there's fire to some extent. Firstly, because French people themselves even joke or talk about Parisians as being less friendly, more stressed, maybe a little bit more distant than other French people. So there's a little bit of a stereotype anyway happening within the country. Secondly, even the French foreign ministers have launched multi-million euro campaigns trying to get French people working in service-facing roles to be warmer to tourists. In 2009, there was the famous Smile campaign, which is pretty self-explanatory. And more recently, we've had a campaign called Do You Speak Touriste? And for those of you who speak French, I will link that down below because it's kind of hilarious. And thirdly, after living here for 4 years, yes, I have encountered some really rude people, including a postal worker who literally brought me, an adult woman, to tears because she was just so mean. I will never forget you, lady. But I will say that in general, French people and even the Parisians are polite, kind and respectful people 99.99999% of the time, and if you encounter otherwise, it's probably one big cultural misunderstanding. So that being said, let's jump into the 4 reasons why you may perceive a French person to be rude when in fact they're just being French. What you need to know is that French people are coconuts. Yep, coconuts. According to German-American psychologist Kurt Lewin, the world can be roughly divided into 2 kinds of people, peaches and coconuts. Peaches are all warm and fuzzy on the outside. They share personal stories quickly. They're the kind of people that open up, laugh a lot, invite you around to their house after 24 hours. But if you're trying to dig deeper and really become one of those best friends forever, you're gonna eventually hit a tough inner shell that's very hard to get into and is a special place really reserved for their closest friends and family. Coconuts, like the French, may seem colder and distant at first because they've got a tough outer shell that you need to crack into. But once you crack that shell, you're going to get into the nice, lush inner coconut. And what we often say amongst ourselves as expats in France is that it's really hard to make friends here, but once you do make a friend, you'll soon realize that they're your most loyal, trustworthy, and open friends, and they're real friends for life. But as strangers visiting France or people who have just moved to France, you might find it takes a lot of time to get through that tough outer shell. It's exactly the same concept when it comes to getting chatty with strangers. In New Zealand, you can get chatty with anyone, you can open up to the person sitting beside you on the bus, you can tell your whole life story to your hairdresser. When I think about it, sometimes I wonder if my hairdresser in New Zealand knew more about me than my own mother. But in France, less so. Making chit-chat with strangers isn't really common. So just imagine you're in a restaurant and you see a lovely French couple sitting beside you. They probably don't want to hear about your arthritis or your son Jimmy who's backpacking around South America at the moment. Honestly, for French people in this kind of setting, they're like, why are you speaking to me like this? We don't know each other. Can I please have my privacy? You keep your privacy. Let's respect that. French people in general, I think, don't want to act fake. They don't want to act like they've known you for the past 10 years and that you're best mates, when it's just simply not the case. For them, that would be a little bit hypocritical. So, long story short, the French aren't actually being rude here. When they treat you with a little bit of distance and formality, for them, that's being respectful. It may come across as icy, but it's definitely not done with menace or bad intention. So there's definitely a thing in France where people think that the waiters are being rude and inattentive because the service is so slow. And they've actually looked into this. So they did a study timing the average time it took from a client sitting down at a table to being served a glass of water in London eateries and in Parisian eateries. And what they found is that in London, it took an average of 3.4 minutes to get served. And in Paris, it took a grand total of 17.9 minutes on average. But I can explain. In France, taking your time to enjoy your food is crucial. This is why we have our famous 1-hour lunch breaks. It's an important moment to share good food, good times with the people around you, and to build relationships. If you think about it from a business perspective, of course it makes more sense to treat it like a factory, get clients in, out, super speedy service, clear out that table one after the other to get more money in. And so if you think about it from that way, they're actually being really nice. I've also heard people question, well, maybe it's because they don't get paid tips. Maybe that's why this service is so slow. But I would challenge that, to be honest, because back in New Zealand, our service is super speedy and we don't get paid tips. I really think it's a cultural thing, and I really think it's around the way you do business. In saying all of this, of course, if you're in a rush, you can tell the waiter up front, and it's usually no problem at all. Point number 3 is that in France, the customer is not the king. I know in the Anglo-Saxon world especially, we're used to this old age adage of the customer is always right, you know, if they want my hard-earned money, then they better work for it. But in France, this really isn't the case. In France, the server doesn't want your money, he wants his dignity. You've got to remember that France is a very hierarchical society. Even 220 years after the revolution, and even with their motto of égalité, French people are implicitly aware of their status in society. So even though you're probably not thinking it, a French waiter may automatically feel a little bit lower in society if he's serving you. And he wants to feel like he's an individual, and he's an individual interacting with an individual, and that it's an equal playing field. And that being said, you'll also find in France that salespeople will not bend over backwards and kiss your butt to get a sale. That kind of behavior may earn respect in other parts of the world, but here it's seen as being really degrading. That's another reason why it's totally counterproductive to try and rush a Parisian waiter. He is not your garçon. His ethos is that the more you try and rush me, the longer I will take. However, if you treat the waiter like an equal, as he deserves to be treated, obviously, and ask his advice, perhaps, for the food or the wine list, I'm sure you'll get a much warmer reception. The fourth and final point that I want to bring up is that Parisians have a tourist hangover. France is the most popular tourist destination in the world, every year receiving around 85 million visitors, of which Paris takes 20 million of these. The local population of Paris is 2.2 million. So to take on 20 million extra per year is enormous. On top of that, Paris is a very crowded and dense city as it is. There are 21,000 inhabitants per square kilometre compared to London, for example, who have just 5,000 inhabitants per square kilometre. So yes, Parisians can occasionally get tired of tourists. And in Paris, we tend to work really long hours, much longer than the 35-hour week, I assure you. And the average commute is 1 hour as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if a Parisian comes across as a little bit stressed or impatient if you go up to them in the morning commute, their evenings, they're trying to get home, or during the busy lunch hour, and ask them for advice, directions. They may not come across as the most chilled and friendliest people in the world. But if you do have to approach a Parisian on the street, just remember this old concept of etiquette. Be courteous and say, "Bonjour, parlez-vous anglais?" And I promise 99% of the time you will not get attitude. Of course, most Parisians do speak English, but I think it's really important to say bonjour at first because it shows that you're making an effort in their country and that you're not assuming that they will speak English to you. Parisians are not even snappy with tourists in general. They're snappy even with French people if you forget these basic rules of social conduct. I had a French friend the other day. We were going down into the metro and they had a big suitcase with them. So they needed to go through the special doors, the big wide doors that allow the suitcases to pass through. Now the man who's in control of opening these bigger doors was on the phone. And so my French friend was waving out saying, "La porte, s'il vous plaît," the door please. And the guy stopped speaking. He took his phone away from his face and he was like, do you want to say hello first or? And afterwards I was like, oh gosh, that guy, why did he have to be in such a bad mood? And my French friend was like, no, I was in the wrong. I should have said bonjour. I was rushed. I saw him on the phone. I just assumed he wouldn't want to be interrupted, but I should have said bonjour. So now I'm going to zip through just quickly 5 simple rules that will help to reduce any risk of French rudeness by at least 72%. So the first is what I call the Holy Trinity. Bonjour, merci, au revoir. If you can remember these 3 French words, you'll be fine. You say bonjour whenever you go into a store, a restaurant, you ask people for advice, directions, etc. And anytime you kind of enter a closed space with people, so whether that be an elevator or a doctor's office, you will also say bonjour. Merci, thank you, is pretty self-explanatory, and au revoir whenever you leave said restaurant, shop, etc. Bonus points if you throw a bonne journée in there too. Number 2, don't think of Paris as a store where the customer is always right and money talks. Those cultural norms do not apply in France. Instead, think of Paris as a gracious host who has welcomed you into her home. Be a charming guest and you'll be warmly embraced. Tip number 3 is always be nice to waiters. They don't need your tip to survive, so the only way that you're gonna make them be nice with you is to be nice to them first. Also, don't mistake a French waiter who's teasing you as being rude. I know that sometimes French waiters love to tease their customers, especially the foreign ones, and maybe this isn't something you're used to, especially if you're from the States, because waiters don't really dare to tease and joke with you so much because they're running on the tips. But the French waiter here is definitely not intending to be rude, they're just having a little bit of fun with you. Tip number 4 is that if a conversation does ensue with a French person or French people, just chill out a little bit. Don't be too loud or giggly or use hyperbole too much. These are kind of marks of simpletons in France, for lack of finding another way to explain it. So try to keep things a little bit more chilled, refined, and speak at a less excited level. Tip number 5 is don't take things too personally. You know, if you do encounter a rude French waiter, they're not sitting there saying, "Oh, I know that Janet's come all the way there from Brazil. I can't wait to ruin her holiday." 9 out of the 10 times, it's not about you at all. I think we should all have a bit of empathy for French waiters, especially in Paris, overwhelmed with the tourist traffic and very likely to be overworked, underpaid. So try and think about it from that perspective first before taking things personally. In conclusion, I think it's high time that we kill this stereotype. The root of the problem is not that French people are rude, it's that we all have different cultural interpretations on events and cultural norms when it comes to interacting with each other. If you're polite and not condescending and you remember the Holy Trinity, bonjour, merci, au revoir, I think you'll find that the French icy exterior melts and they'll go the extra mile to help. So, the next time you have a problem with a French person and you wonder, was that French person just being really rude to me? Try and think about the things we spoke about in this video to assess the situation first. And if you conclude that yes, they were being really rude, it's probably true. Rude people do exist in this world. but probably not all of them in France or Paris. So that's all from me, guys. Please share your thoughts, your opinions, your stories down below. I'll love to read them. And thank you for watching my first ever YouTube video. Again, please give me a thumbs up or subscribe to my channel so I know that you're out there. And until next time, à bientôt!